Welcome to Microdose Psychedelic Insights, powered by the Conscious Fund. This is the Psychedelic Insider Series, fireside chats with industry leaders in the psychedelic space.
Hello, everyone joining us. Welcome to this edition of the Microdose Fireside Chats. My name is Alana Armstrong, and I'm representing Alan Aldis Communications. And with me is Susan Chapelle. She is the co-CEO of a company called HAVN, and they are establishing a mycology lab at UBC. Hi, Susan. How are you?
Hi, Alana. Thank you for having me today.
Thank you for joining us. It's really great to see you. I haven't seen you in a little bit. That was in January, and I actually got to had breakfast with you. We really had an amazing talk there. I got to know you, quite well in just a short amount of time. And what really impressed me about you, and this was actually before you joined HAVN, and I'll have you tell us all about what you're doing in a second. But yeah, what really impressed me about you was just how amazingly multi-talented and multifaceted you are. You have, a background in medical and in business and in research and in paddleboarding. I had to throw it in. And in cannabis. And I hope that we touch on all of these things. I wanted to, keep the conversation really flowing today. So instead of rattling off your entire resume off the top of the conversation, I'm going to prompt you throughout, and we're going to hit on all of the amazing things that you've done in the past and that have brought you to HAVN. And so I will start by just asking you, about HAVN. What are you doing? How old is it? And what are the, what are the short-term and maybe long-term goals?
Thanks, and thanks for not going down the resume hole right off the top. I really appreciate that. So the primary focus of HAVN is to create a safe and high-quality supply chain for psilocybe compounds and mushroom compounds. Basically, we are applying for a Health Canada license to be able to standardize the methodology of growing, which has not been done yet to scale. So traditionally, compounds are gathered from either the governments or from universities that are doing extractions, but developing natural compound extraction has not been done at scale. So I think the same thing happened in cannabis, where we all imagined products at the end, but really didn't imagine the supply chain and think through the supply chain. So HAVN is a group of extremely passionate and diverse individuals. We're definitely 50-50 women and men, and we don't look like your normal psychedelics company. Having a female CEO is an unusual thing these days. But we're pretty much aiming to develop a comprehensive library of compounds that can be used for research.
Yeah, you mentioned something interesting there about the unusualness of the company, in that it's female-led. You have a 50-50 ratio. In such a nascent industry, how many female CEOs do you know of, and have you met and connected with many of them? Tell me a little bit about that.
I just met, it was actually on your podcast, the other female CEO. There's one other female CEO, and we're very similar backgrounds and passions. She's in Toronto. I can't recall her name right now. But we connected over LinkedIn and just said hello to each other. But it is really unusual in the psychedelic space. And I'm hoping, every time you have a nascent industry, you have all the hopes in the world for diversity and inclusion. And then the reality hits that, in cannabis, still only 8% of CEOs, which is, I think, 2, are female. So female-led companies are still unusual, and not just in this industry, in a lot of industries. But I really think that, although we may be different and forward-facing, which is sometimes a challenge for women to be put in the head of companies, we run amazing companies because we have such diversity of experience, and we come at problems with different solutions. So, and we also work with teams differently. So it's not to say there's one or the other, but there should be, hopefully in nascent industries, we can start seeing more women coming up through the ranks.
Mm-hmm. And is this your first role as CEO?
That's an odd question. I've run my own companies forever. So I started an integrated healthcare clinic back in 1999. And I was everything. I was the CEO, I was founder, I was chief technology officer, and I managed finance and scaled. I did all of social media when social media was also very new to operating a corporation. And I scaled it. It was the largest healthcare practice in my area and the very first multidisciplinary clinic as well. So I've always entered industries fairly early on and had to do really crazy things to get them running, including land use changes. When I came to Squamish, it was entirely an industrial town, and there was no zoning for professional industries. So I had to go through land use changes and rezonings and convince council that healthcare was something that they did want to see on their main street. And then access for patients throughout my terms. I ran for politics because I was so dismayed with the access to healthcare situation. I was a two-term elected politician working on integrations of healthcare in politics as well.
I'm really glad that you brought up your background as a politician. And I actually didn't realize that it was your progress through medicine that brought you there. What were your earliest goals? Were you always dreaming of going into medicine, or was it research? What did you originally want to? What did you dream of growing up to be?
That's a great question. My dad was. I come from a family of engineers and physicists, and they definitely wanted to see me in medicine. And I had healthcare challenges. I was in the hospital very early in my life and spent most of my years in hospital until I was 21. And so medicine was naturally, it's what I read about, it's my experience, and the ability to find, I was basically told I wasn't going to make it out of the healthcare system and that I would live past between 19 and 21. So it accelerated everything for me, including the desire to help other people and work in medicine. And my first career choice was being a microsurgeon. I wanted to sew people's hands and fingers on. And when I definitely traveled down that path, and then I was completely dismayed by the medical system and the systems in place for people to have conversations with their practitioners, for people to spend a long time really discussing the interrelationships of all of the disease profiles. And I ended up going into massage therapy, oddly enough, thinking when it became a registered profession, again, I was early in, and it was one of the first years where it was a registered healthcare profession. And in my massage therapy career, it was incredibly difficult because I came from studying so much anatomy and physiology into a complementary healthcare service, which was not evidence-informed at all. So I took that career and I basically pivoted into doing neurobiology research, but still in complementary medicine and understanding the effects and mechanisms of how manual therapy affects our healing system. And I ended up publishing quite extensively on mechanisms of manual therapy in wound healing.
Right. I mean, so you've had an amazing journey through traditional medicine, and we touched on cannabis a little bit. So how did you, how did you turn into the cannabis world? Was that more, on a personal level, or was it medicinal right from the beginning?
It was medicinal right from the beginning. So at about 12 years old, I found street weed in Toronto and started smoking and noticed an immediate difference in my healthcare. And it's hard to say if it was actually affecting I have an inflammatory disease, so it was hard to say what exactly the mechanism was, but I felt great relief. And so from the time I was 12, I was in alleyways smoking, and basically when I'd leave the hospital, I'd find it and manage to take it. And as I got to a place where I can actually access it a little bit more, my respirologist prescribed it to me. Still, access was really difficult. And in my healthcare clinic, I fully focused on post-surgical cancer care. So access to medicine for my cancer patients that were going through such a struggle, and in my community would have to drive down from Squamish to Vancouver, which is quite a distance on a mountain highway, to get to the Compassion Club where they could access appropriate medicine. So this was another reason to run for politics. I wanted people in my community to be able to access all forms of cannabis for use in their healthcare. But as you can imagine, this was in 2011, and the cannabis conversation of legal was not yet something that was top of mind. And it wasn't until Trudeau came along and started talking about making it legal that it became a political conversation. But in the meantime, we had no policy for dispensaries, and I didn't even think about the cultivation part of that time. I was just thinking about dispensaries. And so I lobbied, and actually it was Jamie Shaw's policy. I took Jamie Shaw's policy from Vancouver and changed it to reflect my community and passed it. But it took 3 times putting it forward and a lot of political capital. I had to fill the room with cancer patients. It was really difficult in those days. And still at conferences, I was always the one that was under the stairs while people were drinking quite extensively in the bars. I'd be outside in the alleyways in the freezing cold, underneath the staircases, smoking joints with other mayors. And, it was really difficult to remove the stigma and the bias of being a politician that was actually smoking cannabis on a regular basis.
And your roles in the cannabis industry, what kinds of skills did you hone, and what kinds of tools do you now have coming into HAVN life?
Yeah, that's a great question. My skills in the cannabis industry were very policy oriented. It was, first year of legalization, just before the 17th, that glorious day when everything opened up. And policy-wise, the provincial and the federal governments were still controlling municipal governments and hadn't communicated with municipal governments on land use and policy. So my job, I wanted to help small growers obtain access to the market by understanding business perspectives, by looking at their land use, looking at their infrastructure, and be able to see if they had access to power, access to water, and how that was going to integrate with their municipalities. So I basically ended up taking policy from across British Columbia and across Canada and mapping it all out into a simple document that we could look at to understand advocacy and where to advocate for policy changes. It's easy to knock on people's doors, but unless you're working in a place that people are willing to be open-minded and change their policy, it's really difficult to change people's minds. And that brings you to HAVN, which is, I think that you see in the psychedelics industry all of these models of clinics as a model for building psychedelics. And it's amazing to have clinics to facilitate ketamine injections, which is legal right now. But really those models, it's a really difficult model to understand. You're setting up an infrastructure to study the effects on humans, but we don't have a research infrastructure yet that can take compounds and actually develop a mechanism so that we can convince politicians that these compounds are actually fantastic for mental health.
Right. So, and you'll be focusing on psilocybin, as we said, or focusing on, I guess, creating a way to grow these at scale. Why is that so important, or why is that a process that needs to be developed?
I've always been interested in they're called alternative medicines, but I think most plants and medicines, most medicines are derived from plants and fungi. So we look at chemotherapy and it's derived from the yew plant. And when that came and was researched and proven as a way to combat over-exploding cells, people accepted that. But I think these compounds have really changed, that they've had this incredible stigma around them because of propaganda and policy that was driven by propaganda. And when you have policy that was driven by propaganda, the amount of work that you have to do to remove that stigma, you need compounds to be able to supply researchers. And currently the compound supply is dismal. You either have to give away all of your IP and promise a company that you're going to be working with their compounds forever in all human trials, or you're paying $80,000 a kilogram for compounds. So there's a massive discrepancy in the supply chain for compounds. And also the extraction, the methodology, because it's illegal and in restricted access with both the FDA and Health Canada, deriving compounds, and there's so much to be done with deriving compounds and methodology around growing, around just all the variables of doing indoor compound development. So things that are naturally found in the wild, and now you're trying to develop compounds to export to researchers globally. And those methodologies all come from what we consider the gray market. So HAVN is, our group of scientists is basically trying to figure out all the variables involved in growing. And then we've got a facility out at UBC, on the grounds of UBC campus. And we're going to be looking to standardize the methodology and then share that in research so that other people have access to these compounds.
Oh, great. And there seems to be quite a bit going on at UBC around psychedelics. Is that correct? There seem to be a few projects, at least, that are based out of there.
Yeah, that's exactly the point. So there's lots of research projects going on, and then obtaining the compounds all has to be done across the border. Or I think there's one compound developer in Toronto, but it's prohibitively expensive. So there's USANA in the States. There's a bunch of places that do synthetic compounds, but organic compound development and full plant development of all the compounds, because just like in cannabis, where you have everybody focusing on THC and CBD, in magic mushrooms or the psilocybe compounds, we're just focusing on psilocybe and psilocybe SP compound derivatives, where there may be in these organic compound list a mixture or entourage effect of all sorts of different compounds that could be effective working together. So we'd like to develop an entire compound library for people to be able to access for research.
Ah, all right. And this is a pretty hot topic, right? The, synthetic compound versus those from a whole fruiting body. So why do we want one over the other? Or, in what circumstances do we want one over the other?
I think, again, it's that entourage effect that, when you're ordering a synthetic 99.9% psilocybin compound or psilocybin compound, that's all you're getting is this synthetic molecule. And it is a great way to see the effect. But again, it's synthetically derived. Both the arguments, a compound is a compound, but looking at entourage effects is going to be massive in the next few years. We're at the very start of the slope of research on these compounds. And I think that there are so many other novel compounds in this fungi to be able to extract and look at the effects of, that it's essential to have a Canadian supply chain.
And okay, essential to have a Canadian supply chain. Of course, there's a whole bunch of research going on that hopefully will be embarked upon. What topics of research are you most interested in seeing happen?
It's every pitch deck that I've seen so far, everybody's focusing on mental wellness, and I think that's absolutely accurate. Everybody in the space is looking for better compounds to deal with mental wellness and human performance. And, coming from a space of altered healthcare, I can say that having anything that alters your perspective and connects you in a positive way to either your body or the environment around you can be life-changing, even in a moment where you're able to see something in a different light or think something through that you didn't think about before. These compounds offer such amazing benefits. And it's like the cannabis industry, legalization blew everything, and now we have to research everything, but these compounds have been around forever. And people have been using psychedelics forever. They've been in so many different cultures and so many different aspects of life, but we haven't, because we've had war on drugs, we have not had the opportunity to develop appropriate medicines surrounding these compounds and use them in a positive way. So now we have clinics as a model where you go in and get facilitated, and we have people looking at ketamine treatments, which has always been a treatment. It's not really a novel treatment. It's a novel treatment for depression, but not really a novel treatment. It's always been used for pain. But now we have an entire new group of compounds that are opening up that have no proven harm, just like cannabis, no harm, and where one treatment can actually facilitate a really life-changing experience. So the positivity surrounding this is massive. And we call it a psychedelic revolution again, which I roll my eyes at a little bit because I don't think people have ever stopped taking psychedelics. And I know the experience in my community, which is not drug adverse at all. We're a small mountain community, and people have had access to these compounds and use mushroom compounds for a lot of different things, including microdosing for depression. And I had never really thought about, I've always done full doses and had crazy hallucination experiences, but the idea of microdosing compounds really appealed to me, and developing formulations where there's, you don't have the full perceptual, I can't go to work experience, but you receive the benefits. And you don't need facilitation, and you can take it safely in your own home. I just think that there's, how we're going to get there with policy is a long and winding road, but we have to, those are things that we have to think about, is how do we use evidence-informed policy to change people's minds. The research has been done. We have, and the work that MAPS has done, and Compass Pathways, there's so many leaders in this space in research and John Hopkins getting into the space as well. So many fantastic researchers and an endless source of literature that's peer-reviewed that shows the effect of these molecules. But again, policy is on the exact opposite side, where it's restricted, it's considered a compound that's in an addictive, it's still in an addictive place, even though research shows that it's not addictive. And we haven't changed politicians' minds because it's legalizing drugs in general is such a sensitive topic.
And from listening to experts like yourself talk about these subjects, it makes me wonder about the piece of the puzzle called safety and how far along we are in understanding the safety profile of these classic or key psychedelic compounds. Where do you know where we're at when it comes to psilocybin mushrooms?
You know, when you read the bottom of every research paper in the communication and it says more research is needed, that's where we're at, where people have been taking these compounds forever and ever, but we have to prove long-term. And because the research is very new, like 1995 was, things started escalating again with psychedelics. But one of our advisors has been doing LSD and psychedelics research since the 1970s, David Moakler. And if you haven't read his research, he does a lot of 5-HT2A receptor research. And, really all of us in the space at HAVN come from long-time accessibility and advocacy for medicines that are less harmful than normal pharmaceuticals. And, I can go and buy Tylenol with codeine that is proven to destroy my liver across the counter from any Shoppers Drug Mart. But I can, but in the psilocybin space, the cautiousness, all these companies starting up and being like, we're starting to inject ketamine, but everything's facilitated. And, it may increase or decrease symptoms and you may get a psychedelic experience. But the whole idea of taking subperceptual doses is very new and may be a better place to focus is microdosing. And I think we're very interested in other compounds that are not illegal, but are in the same scribe or the same genus as psilocybe, but may have the same effects and that may be able to be licensed in a formulation for natural healthcare products, which would be immediately accessible to the public. And I am really interested in leading in that space, in formulations for natural healthcare products using fungi derivatives and compounds.
Wow. And explain that a little bit more. It would have the same effect, like the same sort of psychedelic effect?
So not necessarily the psychedelic effect, but the neuroplasticity effect of increasing connection between neurons. All of these compounds have shown some effect on, and especially it's mostly in research done on humans, where you look at perception and creativity. And I think many of us know that the tech boom was basically facilitated by altered perceptions of reality, and a lot of creativity comes out of these compounds. But I'm pretty sure there'll be other compounds that are maybe not as effective, but could be taken at lower doses that aren't necessarily restricted yet, that could have the same sort of effects. And I think I didn't really answer the safety question. The safety question of these compounds is really because we just started doing research, the long-term human trials on effects of serotonin receptors have to be done. And that's why compound supply is our very first question is, can we standardize the methodology and supply compounds to those in need of doing long-term research with humans and animals?
Mm-hmm. So saying that the work done at HAVN could, in effect, down the line, help to establish the safety profile or toxicity profile and safety profile of these psilocybin mushrooms, and help to change policy, right? Is that kind of the thinking? What other down the line goals does HAVN have with the work that it's doing?
Down the line goals, we have a couple of subsidiaries, HAVN Health, that definitely wants to get into the nutraceutical market and I'd like to also develop innovative dosing technologies. We're looking at all the microdosing technologies and bioavailability of compounds. There's so much new novel work to be done in this space, and it's really exciting to have a team that's actually capable of getting it done. That's funny that I was just looking at my board through the mirror there, and that's one place where there's very little work done on fibrosis and serotonin receptors. So increasing serotonin and dumping serotonin, there's some evidence in other medications that it can cause heart fibrillation. So, and again, everything's dose dependent. So, but I think that there's a lot of areas to be done in inflammatory. We're talking about mental health and we talk about depression, but using psilocybe or compounds from mushrooms as anti-inflammatory mediators is another really exciting space that not many people have gotten into. And, COVID has basically really helped us all with policy development and really pushing the envelope of evidence-informed policy.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, I have so many questions bubbling up to the surface of my mind, but since you brought up COVID, and it has people thinking about mental health, it has people thinking about reintegrating into society, in a hopefully back to normal sort of way. And it also kind of gave some people, some time to step away from their typical work and, maybe do some thinking about psychedelics and maybe kind of furthering their interest or, writing to their politicians. Do you think that that this period of time, this last couple of months, has been sort of an underlying win for the psychedelics industry?
I think that the people that are interested in healthcare and access to safe medicine have been thinking about psychedelics for a long time. I mean, I will point to David in the 1970s becoming a psychotherapist and then a pharmacologist and then a toxicologist, all to further the research. And we were talking today, and he basically was speaking in isolation about, how the perception of everything has changed. And for me, with COVID, what I've watched is how fast we can innovate in healthcare. So you look at, boom, labs immediately started working on COVID and diagnoses and antibody serums, and also looking at vaccines. So immediately people pivoted, and it didn't take very long, but normally to change change any policy, it basically is such a slow moving ship. It takes I've noticed about 12 years. 12 years for economic cycles to go through, for people's minds to actually wrap their head around something that needs changing, and then for some brave soul to lose their job and stand up and put forward policy all at the same time. So putting forward innovative policy, you can really risk your re-election in politics. So it's to innovate policy in healthcare around psychedelics or drugs. We still, unfortunately, have massive areas of both the countries in the US and Canada that are not interested in legalizing drugs and still are consumed with the harms that people do because of their perception of things that they see around them. But, the addiction reform that needs to happen, the mental health care space that needs to happen, and reform in pharmaceuticals, I looked at, because I worked in that space in pain, mechanisms of pain for so long, and going to conferences, and it's all drug after drug where people are changing a single molecule and marketing a new drug where there was never really any effect. And the treatment size would increase until a p-value was reached. And the toxicity of the drug, when it wasn't really proven to work, was massive and at times outweighed the benefits of the drug. And then we have the psychedelics industry, which in a time of COVID has also exploded because it's novel treatment for mental health care. It's safe, effective treatment. It involves facilitation, which is the other point about facilitation, is the equity of being able to afford that model. For me is a difficult thing to grasp. But the amounts and in the veterans community, all of these communities have been able to accelerate healthcare policy because of COVID. Like in the United States, they stopped cannabis, and then veterans were the first ones that said, we need access to this, and it opened up again. And people's decision making became instantaneous and evidence informed. And all of a sudden, we're listening to Dr. Bonnie Henry in BC talk about science, and everybody's tuning in and listening and making decisions around the science. So I hope the same for psychedelics. And I hope that HAVN can also provide some of that advocacy to point out the fact that there are evidence-informed ways to move this into the public realm.
Mm-hmm. And from policy to, and you mentioned dosing a little bit earlier, to patient care, patient experience. These are there's so many topics that repeat from the cannabis industry, where, we both came from, before exploring opportunities in the psychedelic space. And now that we're watching psychedelics, as you said, explode during the time of COVID, do you foresee ways in which cannabis medicine, the progress of cannabis medicine, will learn lessons from the psychedelic space?
Yeah, the psychedelic compounds and the research infrastructure for psychedelics is so much further advanced than cannabis. And, cannabis, because of its lack of harm, was made into recreation. And the amount of people that are affected by proven, researched cannabis molecules, even though patients take it to better their quality of life, and there's a lot of proven effects with epilepsy, with nausea, and a lot of cancer symptoms, it's still not well documented, and it's still very nascent in its search for a disease, I would say, because people have been using cannabis for stress relief since the beginning of time, but to put it into a healthcare system and add policy to it, now you have a drug that's looking for a disease, as opposed to, the way psychedelics have evolved, where it's always been used for mental health care. And that it's very interesting to look at the differences in the two. But when I open up the research world for psychedelics, it's massive and comprehensive. And now we know what its effects are. We know we're working out dosing, and we're working out ways that we can implement the treatments into the public. Whereas cannabis is fully legal, you can buy it from your corner dispensary, but we're still working out what the effects are and what the effects are and what diseases it's good for. So it seems like an opposite. It's a really interesting way to look at things when you look at the amount of research available on both the molecules and compounds. Right,
and staying on the topic of the progress of psychedelics, and also drawing on experience from the cannabis industry and the ways in which because of regulations, because of just the changing landscape, the ability to pivot was, essential. So what kinds of ways might HAVN have to pivot in future, do you think?
Pivoting, I think that we do daily pivots based on access to information because we are a very new company. We basically started in March. So, and then we read through massive amounts of research. We were thinking about nutraceuticals already and microdosing, but then you look at the policy space, and you realize how far away that is. And then what space can you hold in this new industry that gives you, that helps move policy along? And we have, we're the majority of scientists that are basically looking at, and we have our group of scientists and then people that are all users in the space that have found such great benefits. And I see so many, like Numinous, their CEO, talking about depressive states and having, and everybody's somehow already accessed the compound and been able to help their depression. And now they're so passionate that they're wanting to make it available on a broader spectrum. So I think being able to pivot your strategy is, any company should be able to have a strategy that includes pivots and be very flexible in your business model. And if you're not flexible in your business model and can't respond to policy changes and politics, and also, licensing changes, because it was my strategy instructor when I was doing my MBA said never get into any industry that involves politics. And of course, that's the only industry I've been in. They've all involved politics and political change. Because, being a scientist and publishing papers, I look at, maybe 700 people in the world I know that 700 people have read my papers, but it doesn't change policy for post-surgical care. So that research doesn't change policy. So as much research as you can supply, the person that's deciding on policy is not going to be combing through your research paper and going, oh, I see it actually has a massive effect on mental health care, and perhaps we should look at opening this up, and then supplying it and then realizing the dangers as we go along. And instead, we do really prohibition policy and then slowly trickle policy along. And when you're running in a business space, you have to be able to quickly react and pivot to policy that comes along the line, because it can get more restrictive and it can also open up. And I'm hoping that we've seen such innovation open up over this time of pandemic, that looking at novel cures for other mental health and illnesses will be helped by psychedelics.
Mm-hmm. Interesting that you brought up, and I know you touched on your personal history with psychedelics. The CEO of Numinous is quite open with his journey with psychedelics. Could you imagine being the CEO of HAVN or any psychedelic business having not at least tried psilocybin mushrooms or maybe LSD?
Yes, I can. Because when I had tried in my youth a lot of different substances. For a while I was a stagehand in Toronto. I toured rock concerts, so I had access to a myriad of illegal substances at the time. But I haven't always had positive experiences. And the length of time it takes, I can't imagine it becoming addictive, because you really have to plan for taking any of these substances. But I do think that a lot of people are interested in healthcare, and because you haven't tried a treatment doesn't mean you're not interested in helping the health of others. So when you see the amount of work, again, that's been done, the clinical trials that are going into stage 3 with the animal studies, the receptor studies, there's so much work done. Why wouldn't you want to help humanity find a better way to deal with mental health when it's such a crux of our civilization right now? Is people, we're dealing with our not our first pandemic, but our first time in our lifetimes pandemic. But there's pandemics all over the world, and there's massive mental health issues all over the world. There's trauma from war. There's all sorts of things that will cost society massive amounts of money if they're not addressed. And so dealing with these things in a safe, effective way with, either microdosing or full dosing of substances that are helpful, it just seems like a no-brainer to me. And, it will be a slow path. And I'm hoping it's not just that we're going to respect the space of culture and society that have used this as traditional medicine, as well as developing effective and safe pharmaceuticals that can lessen the side effects that are horrendous from mental health medication right now.
Mm-hmm. Good points there. And I want to get your perspective on this, because yes, it's this, these compounds are beautifully ancient. They've been used traditionally in many different cultures around the world, and this is something that the psychedelics community is really passionate about protecting. So how do we balance that aspect and never forget it, but also build businesses that thrive and that, contribute to the economy and heal people and employ people and establish diverse workspaces? How do we do this? Or it's a very great question.
I think that's all. We didn't do it very well in cannabis. I think that one of my rallying points is coming from OG in cannabis and in my community, seeing, I look at women-led businesses and spaces and community in the sense of community economic development. And we had all these amazing small businesses that basically had to shutter because of legalization. And we had the community safety unit come and bang down the door of these clinics that have been supplying cancer patients with medicines that they needed, and only gave them the one legal option to choose from with very limited product sources. And so I don't think we do a very good job of respecting traditions in medicine. And at the same time, on the other side is respecting evidence-informed medicine and the fact that there is no perfect model. It's not pharmacy or traditional medicine. There's a balance where you can develop new pharmaceutical ways to deal with these complicated issues at the same time as giving access to cultural groups that have traditionally used this medicine. We do it with the First Nations, although very poorly, is access to traditional medicines. But these are all traditional medicines. Everything that comes from the ground has been used in traditional medicine. It's not just fungus, it's like ayahuasca treatments. And there's so many different compounds that will become pharmaceuticalized over the next few years. And it is finding the balance of everything of, the people in your company have to reflect that as well. You can't just have a mono slate of type of diversity and expect to have novel outcomes or ideas. The path, I call it the path most trodden as opposed to the path, and the path most trodden is not where you find innovation. So, and the way we've looked at all of our industries is been down that path most trodden, but going down the path least traveled as well doesn't necessarily mean, which is most of us in the psychedelics industry. I mean, it's it's a very small, we all know each other the same way that cannabis did in the before legalization days, before the massive explosion of big market companies. And I think the market also allows an opportunity for people with good ideas to access capital to be able to do the work that needs to be done to get to a place of legalization. There's already constitutional challenges going on. I think it's going to be like within 4 years, it'll go down the same path as cannabis with constitutional challenges for access to medicine. And then it will have to go down the prescription path where people will have to be prescribed. And then you have medical education that doesn't address any of this as well. So there's so many policy and education pathways to be forged in this industry, and so much opportunity as well, that I hope people consider getting into psychedelics.
I don't want to forget to get to the audience questions. If anyone has, there's 2 up there. I will be asking those in a second. If anyone else has any, definitely add it. Susan, can you just quickly tell us about the team that you're working with, the team that you've built at HAVN?
Yes, Dr. Ivan Castleman is leading our formulations team, and we're applying for the license together, basically to open up the lab at the ETC3 Technology Center at UBC. And Alex Samuelson, more known in the industry as Alex the chemist, is working with us as our Chief Scientific Officer. Berinda Rizzotti, the amazing Berinda Rizzotti, who's one of my mentors. And, we've been working together and apart, but in the same spaces for a very long time. She was one of my heroes when I got into politics. We were both on city council together. And at the time when we met each other, there was very few women in British Columbian politics. So we sort of clung together as a small group of women that were all interested in policy reform and access to medicine for women and changing. I worked hard on rape kits. Berinda helped me so much with being able to advocate at UBCM, the BC Municipalities Forum that happens every year for policy changes. So Berinda is one of the founders. Robert Nigel, who runs the ETC3 Center, he's been the CEO of massive technology companies. I've mentioned David Moakler many times as our advisor. The Honorable Sheila Copps, who is another amazing woman in politics, has also joined our advisory board. And then I think that just going online and checking out the company is the best way to see this space. We have a partnership with the Veterans Transition Network that I'm very excited about. Work with veterans and access to medicine for veterans. I think it's such an important place to work because it's basically access to these veterans are most likely not dosing safely or taking medicines already that same thing, gray market, not tested, but having access to evidence-informed and safe medication and being able to get it at cost is such an important thing for the veterans, and be able to study the outcome on PTSD. So those partnerships are critical for HAVN Life. And as well, looking into supply chain expertise, we've got, myself working on supply chain and looking at the NHP space.
Thank you. I love the team. I know quite a few of the members, and I'm really excited to see what you guys get up to. I will start with the audience questions. Christina Casson asks, how does Susan recommend for someone who is passionate about the psychedelics movement to join the emerging industry, specifically someone who brings a professional background in banking as well as California cannabis industry experience?
That's a great question. The involvement in the industry, because it's so nascent, there's so many people looking for professional people that have skills from other industries to bring into the space. And I wonder what the banking, you mentioned banking, and I think that this is going to be the same thing as cannabis, is that, we're almost 2 years into cannabis and we still don't have banking systems. How is the banking industry going to be? There's so much opportunity there to develop new banking systems or community-based banking systems, even for microloans to cannabis and psychedelic startups. And I think that if you can think about opportunity, feel free to reach out and about how to start working in those spaces. But right now there's so many new companies starting up. I just check with them, get in touch. Don't be afraid to cold call is another thing, is that if you know somebody working in the space, go for a coffee. Most of us are fully accessible, and because we want to see the space move forward, and we want to see more equity and diversity in the industry, is that there's lots of positions available in these new companies as we grow. And same with HAVN, as we grow, we're going to need a diversity of people to join our team to help us achieve our goals.
Yeah, interesting that you kind of brought out the need for banking solutions. We, just went through, a really big ordeal, particularly that hit the cannabis industry in Canada and the US. A lot of, cannabis businesses do not qualify for the kind of stimulus packages that they might get from places like the Business Development Bank of Canada, right? So how different would it have been had there been, access via maybe microloans, as you mentioned, or alternatives to banking?
And people have had to go to public market because there's been no other way to fund industry. So going to public market can be a very difficult choice, but a necessary choice. And it also makes it a very divisive choice. But even for altruistic companies like Haven Life that are planning to do really well in the industry, funding comes from the public markets. And I think that's a fantastic option. But the fact that we can't bank our money, it's what a strange thing to be in a space with a fully legal product and you can't open a bank account. I know that I had trouble getting I've had my own tenuous businesses and businesses that have done really well, but because they were my own businesses, I'm considered a risk. But I was always able to get mortgages owning my own business. But as soon as I went to cannabis, even as a director of a company with a higher income than I've had, it was impossible to get a mortgage.
I'll ask the second one here. There's another one that does involve investing in psychedelics, but I'm going to be fair here, and we'll ask Juan Ailman's question. How have you taken advantage of topics such as psilocybin mushrooms starting to be in the mainstream? So we talked a little bit about the kind of some mainstream aspects. Silicon Valley microdosing has kind of helped bring psychedelics to the mainstream, definitely in the media. So
I can't believe how much media is surrounding. So every day there's new front cover. You go to the newsstands, and for something that's illegal to be on the front cover and explaining how many C-suite level executives are taking psychedelics to advance their companies and communicate better with their teams, I think it's fantastic. I fully support it. And anything, it's almost easier than cannabis now, because when cannabis became legal, there wasn't much to talk about. It was just like, are you going to be smoking a joint on the street? And smoking cannabis is so different than taking a microdose of mushrooms and having something that's very subperceptual but relevant. And I love the fact that it's mainstream, that people are talking about it, but it's funny that they're digging up the past, and, it's always had a hippie connotation. And I think this second psychedelic revolution is more of the blue collar or the white collar revolution. Yeah, I'd say it's a white collar revolution, where we're looking back on the past and going like, wow, I have an iPhone because of psychedelics. All the technology that I have was probably developed with some form of psychedelics and experiences. And listening to people talk about their experiences on psychedelics very openly. Even though it's been such a stigmatized cultural place to be in for so long, to know that all these articles that are coming out are talking about all the revolutions that happened in previous decades and all the advantages that we have now because of it. Mm-hmm. I find it fascinating and I love it.
Yeah, me too. I'm actually becoming less and less shocked by how much media is featuring psychedelics. Like the film that just came out on Netflix, Have a Good Trip. I loved it, and it's that kind of storytelling, I think, that is really helping people just kind of reframe what they thought about psychedelics and the whole, good trip, bad trip, and flashbacks and hippie culture. It's much more sophisticated and just more sophisticated and certainly more patient focused.
Loving the amount of women that are in the space as well now. There's more and more women entering the space. And I have to give a shout out to Shane Mouse as well for changing the dialogue, being an open comedian and a psychonaut. His film is, if you haven't caught his film I think it's on Vimeo. It's called Psychonaut, and it preempted Netflix with a full discussion on psychedelics and what it is, and just basically how he entered the space and changed his comedy. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he's a really great one to listen to because he can. I think him and Duncan Trussell as well. They talk about it. They talk about psychedelics in a really open and again, I'll say sophisticated way and fun. They're both comedians, so of course it's fun and exciting and really smart as well. And I know they both have podcasts. They bring on some, amazingly smart people. I know you were just on there.
Yes, I was just on there, but with two amazing women researchers, Erica Dyke as well, who's been working in the historical aspects of psychedelics for a very long time.
I know that we're like a couple of minutes over 8. I don't know if we're allowed to get to the other 2 questions. Maybe I'll just start asking them, and if the Zoom ends, I guess it'll just end.
And I'll say thank you in advance then.
Do you mind going a couple of minutes over? Okay. Well, we'll go until I see the participant mark, I see the participant level going down to like 1. Is it smart to begin investing in psychedelic research companies this early on? If so, what are some things I should be careful of when deciding to trust and support? And that comes from Adam Sellen.
Thank you, Adam. It's a complicated space to be in, and it's like cannabis. You may have a spike and then a drop in stocks, but look for teams, good teams that can survive. And as Alana has mentioned, being able to quickly pivot. A team that is well put together. Selfishly, I'd say invest in a team that practices diversity and equity and inclusion, because you cannot have a team of same-looking people that are going to be innovative in the space. And I say that from experience and looking at the markets right now. There's also 2 different models. There's the model of the clinic as a research vehicle and people buying up clinics. And then there's people that are entering different parts of the supply chain aspect. And I think that, I love looking at companies that are collaborating across globally with researchers and trying to move the research front forward. So I love those companies. And even though some of them are massive and behemoth, just like Canopy, you need those people to drive the innovation in the space with massive investment. So I'd say cautiously invest because, and don't dump all your money into one company, and maybe diversify your portfolio like any sensible economics, and that know that you're investing in a nascent space and that long-term holding is going to be where you make your money. If you're just looking to make a buck, you'll see exactly like the cannabis industry, that a lot of really great ideas go forward, but the survival of those ideas depends on the cohesiveness of the team surrounding those ideas.
Great. And so the big takeaway, definitely look at the C-suite. Diversity is key in the C-suite and in your portfolio. Finally, we have Denny Gertler. Hey, Denny. Given the obstacles you've mentioned, where do you foresee markets and for which compounds and types of medications first opening up?
I think I mentioned ketamine before, which again, I have got not very popular opinions on ketamine, and because I see ketamine as a cheap way to enter the market, because it's the only legal substance that you can inject into people right now with a medical prescription. And its effects on depression are not very well established, but it's always been a pain medication. It's also a very, it's different than psychedelics because it's a dissociative medication as opposed to an associative compound. But I think those clinics that are practicing trials in that area are excellent. That the fact that this has to be, we need to get the numbers up around depression, and that if people are being facilitated to take ketamine for depression, and we can have some evidence around that, that would be a fantastic model to have clinics to be able to give ketamine to. And as other psychedelics become available for prescription, you already have the infrastructure set up to be able to explore facilitated research with different compounds of psychedelics. I don't know that any of the chemical compounds. I think that people, and including politicians, are going to be more apt to look at psilocybin and naturally derived compounds as far as public access, and that LSD and MDMA may be further down the road, even though they're further ahead in clinical trials with MAPS, and that MDMA has also been used in clinical trials and shown great effect on connectivity and basically positivity, but long-term effects, again, have to be studied, and safety of these compounds. But I think that I'm hoping that we'll move to more microdosing and sub-perceptual, because imagine the infrastructure if you have to give people full doses of psilocybin and they need to stay there for 10 hours in the clinic. It's not a money-making object. It's basically a clinic that is doing full research. So, and would be very difficult infrastructure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, beautiful. That takes us to the end of the questions. They didn't shut us down, and not too many people left. Thank you, everyone. I want to make sure that everyone knows where to find you. So where can we find you online? Plug away.
On LinkedIn and on most social platforms. I'm actually going to just type it in here. It's Squamish Susan.
Yes, you will see all of the places that Susan bikes and paddleboards around, and it looks amazing.
I always say that, in my space of psychedelics, you have a lot of the male senior executives And I will say that, because there's less people here now, the male, pale, and stale model of CEOs who have this massive business experience. And I always point out that they don't have the extreme sports experience of rapid decision making and pivoting on a dime, as well as community economic development.
I like that. I like that a lot. Yes. And any musical performances coming up? Any other?
Yeah, COVID is basically, so I'm a violinist and I play in the Sea to Sky Orchestra. Thank you for asking about that. I always forget about, it's such a huge part of me. Music has always been my happy place, and I've played classical music since I was a kid. With the Sea to Sky Orchestra, we had a bunch of lined up concerts that have all been canceled. And because we're an orchestra of 15 people, we can't play together. It takes an enormous amount of space for our orchestra to get together. We'd basically take up the whole audience. So we can't play online. So it's really put a crimp in things. So our orchestra is really split up. We can't, and we'll be getting together in groups of 4 to practice, but who knows when we'll be able to actually play as a group again. I wonder about classical music in that way with COVID. And large orchestras getting together, or even about theater, because I come from a theater background, and so many of my friends have lost their employment through COVID because they can't play, and their entire revenue generation is live theater. So it's such an odd place. How are we going to be entertained in the future besides online platforms?
Besides fireside chats like these.
It's a great way to connect.
Next time you're on, we'll have to have you play a song for us, maybe.
I will.
Thank you so much. The mountain moving magic mushroom mycology lab creating Susan Chapelle from Squamish. Thank you so much for joining us and giving us your time and your all of your wisdom, and we hope to have you back.
I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about HAVN with you. Thank you so much, and thanks to Alana for all the work you're doing online to promote the industry, and for Microdose Psychedelics Insights. You guys have been killing it in the space with online events, so make sure to follow them online, Alan Aldis and Microdose Psychedelic Insights, because they've been providing fantastic platforms for us to change the world.
Thanks. Yes, let's let this psychedelic explosion continue past COVID. Woo! Thank you everyone for tuning in and giving us part of your Wednesday. We hope you learned a whole bunch, and I really hope you follow Susan. She really is one of the most amazing people I have met.
It's not overcomplicated.
I love you. I'm coming out there to see you soon as we can. So yeah, that's it for us. On behalf of Susan and Microdose and Alan Aldis and myself, good night. Have a lovely evening.
Thanks for joining the Psychedelic Insider series, brought to you by Microdose and the Conscious Fund. Visit our website at www.microdose.buzz.